Well, now we want to bring in our legal analyst, Irv Miller. Irv, we want to first show you and get the reaction to video that we had at the top of the newscast. We'll play it for you again.
Sounds good.
All right, so that was the scene in Logan Square today. What are your thoughts here? If we're analyzing the scene here, who is there, who is not? Protesters, do you see them? And what is that? What are the legal implications here?
Well, first of all, somebody should be filing a case report with the Chicago Police Department to file a charge against the person, the officer, ICE agent that attempted to throw the canister, but pretty much got himself as well. But the problem is we don't know what was happening to him at the moment that he did that. Was he in fear of his own safety at that time and he had to do it, or was he just seeing this motorcycle in front of him that wouldn't move and he decided to throw it for no apparent reason? One is a violation of law if he didn't have a legitimate reason, being in fear of his own safety, but the other is you can't do it for no reason. You're committing an assault, and that's why I think that somebody, either the person on the motorcycle or some of the parents of these kids that were over there, may want to file a case report with the Chicago Police Department. And
looking into evidence of whether there's other videos and that can support either side of the situation.
Just to start an investigation.
Right. Okay, let's turn to what's happening in Broadview at the ICE facility there. Protesters have been hit by pepper ball. There's been tear gas. The fences, we know, have been erected, some of it in public streets. And let's talk about the First Amendment implications here. So what is considered peaceful, legal protest versus what is not?
You know, the Constitution protects peaceful protest. You could yell, you could scream, you could do whatever it takes to have on your posters, and you could bring out all your neighbors, but what you can't do is violate state or federal law in doing a protest. There's a difference between peaceful protest and civil disobedience. And under federal law, you cannot impede or interfere or an assault a federal agent. If you're assaulting a federal agent, that's actually a federal felony. And if you're impeding, trying to block the car from coming out or getting in front of an ICE agent and not letting him move, you're impeding. That's a misdemeanor in federal court. So you want to avoid doing something that could put an ICE agent in a position to put handcuffs on you and take you away. You want to do peaceful protest, not civil disobedience that is a violation of federal or state law.
And we do want to say that in certain circumstances there has been a question of whether there has been peaceful protests that have still resulted in arrests. And I know that our Dave Savini has talked about these erroneous 911 calls. If you could quickly take us through the timing of any legal procedures that could happen related to behavior that some people may think may be in violation of their rights.
Well, you have to, first of all, if somebody feels something's happening to violate their rights, that they think that ICE or any peace officer is violating their rights, and they should file a case report with the local police department, file a complaint with the U.S. Attorney's Office if it's a federal agent up on a roof or down there by the trucks. You can't, you don't want to end up in a situation where you're going to have to explain what you did the next day to a federal judge because you're going to be locked up all night. So you don't want to be in that situation. But if you're, again, impeding or interfering with their official duties, that's not good, because you're going to get arrested, and you want to avoid that.
Well, Irv Miller, I know we have you again in our next half hour, so thank you for your insight right now. Stay with CBS News Chicago for the latest on the protests outside the ICE facility in Broadview. We'll have live updates throughout this hour at 5 p.m. and again at 6. We continue to follow protests and activity outside of the Broadview ICE facility. Joining me again now is our legal analyst, Irv Miller. And Irv, there are a lot of questions swirling about the legality of the actions of some of these federal agents. So is there really any gray area when we're talking about the agents up against the protesters right out there in Broadview?
You know, the gray area is what is the perception of the officer that comes up to you and wants to put handcuffs on you. Some officers are going to say, okay, you're doing wrong, get out of here, I'm going to give you a break. Others are going to say, hey, listen, I'm putting the cuffs on, you're going to jail, and you tell your story to the judge tomorrow.
So if we're talking about the letter of the law, it's really black and white. So by the time it gets to the judge is ultimately deciding if the federal agents or the protesters acted appropriately.
Exactly, but the problem is you don't want to spend that 18 hours in a jail cell waiting to see a judge. You want to protest properly to avoid that situation. I can understand where tempers are flaring, but you want to avoid federal law statutes and state statutes, so you don't get arrested by the Cook County Sheriff or the ICE agents.
So let's talk about these new barriers that they put in that actually, we saw a map that they handed out. It had red, green lines. It showed that now they're actually having the protesters be back farther than previously, even though there is public space closer. So is that an infringement on their First Amendment rights to have them farther away?
You remember what happened when the Democratic Convention was here? The protesters wanted to be closer to the United Center.
Right.
Same concept applied. The United Center eventually gave in and let them move closer. So it'll be determined whether or not they are in proximity of what they're protesting. If they're in the proximity so the ICE agents could hear or see them, I think their First Amendment rights are being protected. But if they're too far back, that's a different story.
Okay, Irv, thank you. Now we want to turn to the former Chicago Police Superintendent, Eddie Johnson. He is joining us now live. So Superintendent, let's talk about Broadview Police, Illinois State Police, and the Cook County Sheriff. All of these agencies are there. And then we have, of course, the ICE agents. Is there supposed to be a line of communication going on between these agencies?
Well, ideally, the unified command will communicate with each other, obviously. Ideally, it would be good if they could communicate with the federal agents out there also, but that's not always the case. But that is the optimum way that you would like to do it.
Okay, so we've seen firsthand, Superintendent, some of these physical handling of protesters by ICE agents. We know that the tear gas balls have been used, pepper spray balls. Is there something different that you think, in your experience, could be done to handle these crowds?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of times these protests, they can go south pretty quickly, but if you communicate with the protest organizers, you can usually keep it under control, because the idea with law enforcement out there is to protect their First Amendment rights, as well as protecting any citizens, including the ICE agents, from potential harm from those protesters. So I think that if they just practice trying to communicate with both sides, that might ease the tensions out there a bit.
There is this fencing that's been up, and we've heard very vocally here from the Broadview Police Department about how they feel that the federal agents are putting that fence up illegally. It's actually impeding emergency vehicles like fire from going through. If you were, well, if you put yourself in their position, police officers, the superintendent, what would you do about these erection of fences in an area that may be causing a safety threat?
Okay, so let's remember, while I was superintendent, I had very good communication with all the federal SACs and directors. But if it's impeding potential emergency vehicles from getting to one spot from another, then I would simply reach out to them and tell them we have a couple of options here. If I really thought it was a hazard, then I'm going to remove those barriers at some point. So I would try to communicate that with them and try to see if we can work to maybe push the barriers back, but you can't impede access to other people just because you're trying to protect that particular building.
So we've seen all levels of escalation here, you know, peaceful protests, some that of course resulted in arrests. What do you think the catalyst is? What's the difference? What is the shift that happens here where it goes from the peaceful protests to that of ones that result in injuries and arrests?
I think it's the rhetoric going on, not just out there, but from D.C. You know, when you can stoke tensions just by the words that you use. And I think that if we all, you know, brought the temperature down a bit and utilize communication skills, not just talking at each other, but talking to each other, I think we would be able to bring the temperature down, because these protests of this nature, you know, it doesn't take much to stoke it up and make it turn violent. And once that happens, then all hands on deck. But I think if they try to communicate with each other a little bit more or a little bit better, that might bring the temperature down.
All right. Former Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson, thank you for your time.
Thank you.